Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Imaging Wire show. My name is Jake Fish. I'm the host of the show and the editor of the Imaging Wire newsletter. And we have a really great one for you today. We have Dr. Wendell Gibby, the founder CEO of Novarad, with us today. And he's got a really interesting story and product to share with us, something that is really important to imaging and in probably the future of imaging, but not something that maybe everybody's thinking about right now. And that's really cool. I can't wait to share it with you. Dr. Gibby, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Honor to be here.
It's really good to have you here. Maybe to start us off, probably a lot of the folks who are watching know you or know of you, but to start us off, can you share a little bit about yourself and your background and what you do at Novarad?
So I'm a practicing neuroradiologist. I also do a lot of interventional radiology. I own Blue Rock Medical Center here in Provo, Utah. I've taught at 3 universities. I'm currently an adjunct professor at UCSD in San Diego. And I founded Novarad a little over 30 years ago. We began as essentially a teleradiography company. I'm happy to elaborate more or less depending on your interest level.
I truly am, actually, because that's quite an evolution between what you're doing now and how you started. And I actually didn't know that you started as a telerad company.
We actually started building surface coils for MRI machines, and there's a circuitous path of how we got to that. But I was working as a young physician at our local hospital, and I live a distance from the hospital, about 30 minutes away. In Utah, we have snowy winters. And one day I was sitting there and a young man came over to the hospital and asked if he could meet with me. He had a friend who was a computer science professor at the local university and had known of some of my research interests. And this young man, Wai-Ho Poon, was looking for a green card. He wished to not have to go back to Hong Kong. He was studying chip design as a PhD level student. And I said, well, can you program my Macintosh computer to get images at my home at night? Because I don't want to have to come into the hospital. Ironically, there was a company that had debuted as a product like this, Icon Medical, which eventually was absorbed by CMAX and then IBM. But they never got back to me. I had requested a product, information, video, and it never happened. So this young man showed up and I said, Wai-Ho, can you program this Macintosh? He said, sure, I can do it. He said, so I said, all right, if you can do this, I will write a job description that only you will qualify for, and we'll get you a green card, which he did. He didn't know anything about programming Macintosh computers. I didn't know any better in terms of what an engineer should or shouldn't know. I was a chemical engineer by training. And so he pulled out these telephone book sized programming instructions on the Macintosh and built a small program, which we called Wai-Ho Windows. And it was actually a very elegant product, and we started taking it to RSNA. I think the first time we showed it was in 1989, and it turned out it was easier to sell software than hardware. We evolved from a teleradiography company into a PACS company in the 90s. We were the first company to have a Windows 32-bit operating system and to use off-the-shelf computer technology like graphics cards and standard monitors, et cetera, and a Windows-based platform. And that evolved into Novarad as a PACS, and then a risk company, and then an enterprise imaging company, and advanced image processing, 3D, et cetera.
So it's quite a story, quite an evolution too. I'm curious, your initial colleague says Wai-Ho. Did he end up staying around?
No, Waiho, as I said, his job in China had been to reverse engineer the Z80 chip, if you're old enough to remember that one from Texas Instruments. He went on as a very successful engineer working for Intel Corporation in Oregon. So his job was, as he was in school, he worked for us for a year or two. We had many other great people that joined us over the years, but I'll tell you one other very interesting sidebar notes here that was essentially the genesis of VisAR. I was sitting essentially in the same desk there at the hospital reading my cases on a rotoviewer, and a young man came to see me from the local university. He was a pre-med student. His name was Steven Savetko, and he was looking for an internship. He was had a background in computer science, but wanted to go to medical school. Extremely bright young man. And he volunteered to work. And I'm like, who turns away, a volunteer? So he worked for free for a year and wrote the first DICOM server. Back then, the DICOM standard had just been published. And he wrote this DICOM server in DOS. He went on to medical school at the University of Chicago and was in an MD PhD program in computer science. A few months after he began at Champaign-Urbana, which was a famed computer school at the time, of Netscape origin, he called me and he said, Dr. Gibby, he said, I can't do medicine. He said, this is so boring. I hate it. It's just a bunch of memorization. I don't want to waste my life in medicine. And I'm like, Steve, stick with it. A lot of things you can do with medicine. He's like, nope. And he quit and did his PhD in computer science. Did a lot of advanced work on image processing and finding, trying to find cancer cells and pathology slides and tanks and forests and, those kinds of things. Was recruited by Google when he finished and interviewed in the Bay Area and said, I can't live here. I have 3 children. It's too expensive for housing. So he came to work for me. This young man went on to head up my R&D team, began the project of doing advanced image processing, 3D rendering. We built our own graphics library to be able to do very fast, sophisticated image processing. And about 5-6 years ago, he came to me, he said, hey, this augmented reality stuff looks pretty cool. I'd like to buy a HoloLens headset. Will you pay for it? And I said, sure, great, let's do it. And that began the journey to OpenSight and VisAR. This young man took not young any longer, he's been with me for 30 years, but began applying many of the advanced imaging principles that we had developed over a decade into augmented reality. And we had our first FDA clearance for OpenSight, which was the first cleared augmented reality system in the United States about 4 years ago.
Just about a couple of weeks ago, you announced the clearance for the VisAR product. Tell us a little bit about that product.
So OpenSight was pre-operative. This was we would overlay the images onto the patient, and the surgeon could render these instantly in 3D, 2D, oblique views, whatever, and sort of plan their incision, put virtual needles, virtual incisions, kind of right up to the point of putting the needle or the scalpel into the body. We then applied for a clearance on operative stereotactic guidance. And the FDA had never really seen something like this. I went back and met with them a couple of times. We didn't really know what we were doing, to be honest with you. Microsoft felt that the accuracy of the headset would not have the tolerance needed to get to, millimeter precision for surgical stereotactic guidance. And, over a period of a couple of years, we introduced a whole bunch of new innovations in terms of how we could register that data, how we could track instruments. And I think sometimes not having experience is a benefit, because many of the products that we see out there have taken a traditional pathway with marrying augmented reality to, say, surgical guidance tools like infrared or magnetic sensors that are found in the OR today. And the product that we developed used entirely the sensors and cameras found on the HoloLens system. So with that, we submitted to the FDA about a year and a half ago, and through some iterations, managed to get this cleared for substantial equivalence as a stereotactic surgical guidance product in spine.
So for your first FDA clearance, what's the specific indication that it goes after?
So it's, again, stereotactic guidance. So insertion of pedicle screws or other spinal guidance procedures. We published one paper a couple of years ago on percutaneous approaches that I think would be of interest to the radiology community, like vertebroplasty, sacroplasty, percutaneous discectomies, rhizotomies, difficult epidural access points, etc. I think it will have wider applications than that, but the first indications for use that were cleared by the FDA were for spine.
And for these, just to make sure I understand, there's an initial CT scan that is performed, and that's what's used to guide the visualization or as the basis point?
Correct. Under the cleared indications, we do a CT scan either preoperatively or we can do it intraoperatively. So a spin CT or O-arm can be used as guidance. Now, that said, there's a lot of technology that we've been working on that allows us to merge data streams from other technologies. So MRI, CT, PET, ultrasound, and X-ray can all be fused and used for guidance. And so currently, one of the main benefits of this is in complex access for difficult biopsies, access points, having that three-dimensional data set to guide you on the patient can really be a time saver. It also eliminates or reduces substantially the amount of procedural radiation that's experienced by both the patient and the operator.
That's because what they would be using without VisAR would be fluoroscopy?
Yes, or multiple CT scans. So imagine if you're trying to place, a difficult access somewhere with CT scan. Our approach under traditional methodology would be to do a pilot CT, place your needle or partially place your needle, do a repeat CT to see if you're close to where you need to be, advance the needle, do another CT or CT fluoroscopy. And for deep, complex access points, that can add up to a lot of radiation. Whereas with VisAR, we do one CT scan, we can create a operative plan, provide multiple targets. So for example, on a sacroplasty, we might glue several areas in the sacrum. There might be several fracture points across the sacral ala. We can provide virtual trajectories all from the same CT initial data set, and then place those needles using the augmented reality guidance. And then you can, inject your cement or watch that under fluoroscopy, but you don't spend as much time trying to get the exact position or trajectory because you have the three-dimensional data set to guide you.
It seems like really big change from the way things have been done and the amount of imaging that has to have been done up until now. How is it different? How is VisAR different from, other AR or VR systems that might be in development?
Well, I think, VR has been used primarily for simulation for a surgeon or a radiologist to sort of navigate through a three-dimensional structure. I personally find VR to be quite confusing, and it's vertiginous. You get in there, and it's not terribly helpful. I don't know that it adds a whole lot to what you get from simply navigating through those images on a monitor in 2D or 3D. But the beauty of AR is that it's immersive. We can see the patient and we can see through them at the same time. So if I point my hand right, my needle goes right and my images are on the right side. I'm not looking up at a screen and trying to translate the motion of my hands to to where the anatomy is. So in that way, it's much more intuitive and it's a much faster learning curve for young physicians. How does Novarad's system differ? We think there are a lot of significant elements that differ, and I'll run through a few of those if you want. I didn't want to make it a marketing commercial, but I think one of the really crucial aspects of augmented reality and guidance in general is how do you precisely localize that data set to the physical object, the human being. Mm-hmm. And we've had kind of a 6-year head start on this. So we've gone through a lot of those iterations that companies are currently trying to use, like, anatomic landmarks or manual registration. Those types of tools can be helpful, but the problem is patients move. You poke them with a needle and even if they wince, they'll shift a couple of millimeters. So then you have to retrack, or if you've tracked to certain objects and then you drape the patient, you've lost your registration. So I think one of the key differences is in the registration technology that Novarad has. We have a number of patents on things such as image visible codes that are found in the data set and automatically registered to the headset. So speed and time are essential. Accuracy is a big deal. I think another thing that sets Novarad apart from the other systems that I've seen out there is Novarad is processing this data set on the fly on a headset. Now, that's not a trivial process because a CT scan may have 500 to 1,000 images in it. Jake, you're old enough to remember some of the early days of 3D, and there would be lag and kind of you'd move your mouse and then the 3D model would update, and you would or they have to dumb the image down in order to get decent processing speed. Novarad created its own graphics engine that runs on the GPU with hyper efficiency, and we're running this data set with advanced things like cubic interpolation and advanced lighting and shadowing, and we can render this on the fly on a headset. Many systems have to process that somewhere else on a server or another computer, and then they spool that over to the headset, which is time intensive. It also doesn't allow you, for some systems, they have like a 3D model, if you would, a shell of what the anatomy looks like. But you can't really move in and out of different things that you would do for the 3D data set. For example, adjusting transparency to see deeper structures, adjusting window level, stripping things off, like pulling the scalp off of the head, et cetera. So I think that's another big difference that Novarad has. I think another element that is really critical. We basically deployed our crypto chart technology for this. We found that the use of augmented reality is very different in an OR. You can't stand around waving your fingers in the air trying to type with virtual keyboards. So you think about, okay, I've got to bring these images up. Well, I have to go to the URL. I have to log in. I have to have a password, and I have to have a patient name and a series number and whatever that data set is. So we encode all of that into a little optical code that basically you look at that with the headset and it will automatically launch the software, automatically log you in, automatically find the correct file and automatically register those to the patient. So that workflow automation, I think, is another big thing that sets Novarad apart.
So I'm curious, what does the VisAR product look like?
Well, you're looking at it. This is the entire OR footprint. It sits on a doctor's head. It can flip up out of the way if they don't want to use it. But all of the computer, the battery, the graphics card, the display, everything is integrated on this second generation Microsoft HoloLens headset. We went with HoloLens for several reasons. One is it's inexpensive. This device is $3,500. I will guarantee you that within a decade, there will be a HoloLens number 4, 5, and 6. As other companies expand the opportunities here, we don't have to support the development of hardware. And I think that's a critical element of the success of Novarad. We're using off-the-shelf technology. It also means that for hospitals, surgical centers, and others where the cost of guidance, a robot can be $2 million. This vastly lowers the ability, improves the ability of a hospital to be able to supply this technology to other procedures. I think the speed is the other thing. I'm a neuroradiologist by training. Most of the intraventricular shunt catheters placed in the United States, even today, are done blindly. They basically measure like 10 centimeters up from the nose and over 3 centimeters and aim for the eyeball with Coker's point. And sometimes they hit the ventricle, but 30% of the time they don't, which means they pull that catheter back and they shove it back into your brain again. That means the additional risk of bleeding, failure of the shunt, damage to the brain. I've seen these catheters placed in the thalamus, in the hippocampus, places you really don't want a catheter to go. So why are they done blindly when we have navigation technology? Well, it's very simple. It takes too much time and setup to go into an ICU or an ER or even most ORs to place a simple catheter. So it's done just blindly. But with this, you would be able to very precisely provide guidance for the surgeon. And I will mention that the surgical brain navigation indication is currently being considered by the FDA. So that's one of the areas that we've been pushing into for our next product, along with others.
That's amazing. And form factor is so small. So it looks very natural. I mean, maybe not necessarily in your current outfit, but in the OR.
Well, I mean, you can put a little cover on it.
Right.
You can, the battery charge will last about 2 to 3 hours. It has a little USB connection, so you can just hook a battery pack if you want to it and go for 6 hours. I've used it in cadaver labs for 6 hours at a time. And again, because the cost is so small, it makes it much more accessible. I did a brain surgery in Armenia a couple of months ago of a young man that had a incurable glioblastoma, and they did not have navigation technology there to guide our cryosurgical probe into the brain, and we used the VisAR system, and it worked perfectly. So we didn't have to import a $500,000 system into a country that would have a hard time supporting that in the cost of their healthcare.
Right.
Novarad is in a lot of different countries where this will be ideal,
So, Dr. Gibby, all this is really interesting. Curious what this actually looks like for the surgeon as they're wearing the VisAR headset.
So the amazing part of this is that a surgeon can literally see through the patient, see into the patient at the same time as they're seeing the physical patient. So it's augmenting their reality with these elegant images that we now create in medicine. So we're going to show an example here of a volunteer who's MRI the brain. We've segmented, and we're showing some virtual guides and the ventricles and different parts of the brain. So here's an example of a volunteer who's MRI of the brain. We have segmented using AI. We continuously register those images. These show the vector tags for tracking. And because we are using the original data set, we can adjust this in terms of window, level, slicing, changing this on the fly. These are not just 3D models, but the data set that is being rendered on the fly on this HoloLens headset. That means we can, as we move around, the system can automatically reconstruct. We also have virtual guides that the surgeon can follow into an area of interest, such as the ventricle.
So understanding that your technology is going to continue to evolve and you're working on new cases, use cases, and applications, what's your vision for how VisAR and your overall AR business evolves over time?
Well, I'm old enough to remember pneumoencephalograms. When I was a medical student, they were still doing those. I watched some of the early CT and MRI technology come, the digitization of radiology, essentially. I think this is just another big step in that evolution of advanced imaging. We have all of this data that we create with elegant imaging technologies, but right now it's sort of sequestered somewhere else. It's on a monitor. It's in the radiology department. It is not accessible to the proceduralist very easily. And having a GPS, if you would, for surgeons and interventionalists, and when I say of interventional radiology, they're really surgeons that are using minimally invasive techniques. So instead of cutting someone open, they use a needle, a catheter, a cryoprobe, or a percutaneous approach to different pathologies in the body. So minimally invasive surgery. I think this opens up some wide horizons to do more procedures with minimally invasive technique, to do them faster, to do them with less radiation. One of the things that we have been trying to do is to create a fairly broad-based technology. So instead of saying, well, this just navigates spine, we want something where it's essentially has the portability of a stethoscope. The doctor just carries it with them, and it might be used for education, patient engagement. It might be used to place a catheter into someone's brain for hydrocephalus. It might be used to know the best trajectory to place an ACL ligament. Our goal, our vision is to take this technology stack that we've created that's built on decades of effort. Things like the servers, the object store, the encryption, the logging, the HIPAA, security issues, the rendering, the 3D and, segmentation algorithms, the artificial intelligence things that we built, that all can work together to create a very effective guidance system that doesn't just work for one procedure. It can be used across a whole bunch of specialties. And our goal is to democratize this in a way. So, currently a robot or these guidance technologies are quite expensive. And as a result, they're relatively limited in use. Mm-hmm. It costs a lot of money to have the specialized people to run them. And you have to cart a lot of stuff into an OR. There's monitors, there's infrared cameras, there's robots, there's, different scanners and things that get trucked in and out of an OR, which takes time to set up. I mean, anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour. And it's costly, and it has to be sanitized between each case and so forth. Whereas we think that by putting all of this technology into an off-the-shelf headset and replacing that will make it much more widely accessible, certainly a lot cheaper. And in the data that we've been collecting, just as accurate.
So for the surgeons and physicians who would use VisAR, how would they go about adopting it?
Well, our model is essentially a software as a service type of model. It can be deployed from the web or from our cloud. The cloud is something Novarad has a lot of experience with. We store about 15 petabytes of data in the cloud now. So it's really very simple. They just go to a link on a web page, you download the software, and you're up and running in minutes. The images from whatever modality, and I have to be careful here because I have to speak only what's FDA cleared, but in this case, a CT scan would be uploaded either, there's three models. There's an OR cart, so it's just kind of an all-encompassed kind of a mini server workstation on a cart in the OR. There's a cloud version where all of that gets put in the cloud. And then there's an enterprise class system where we put in a couple of servers at the hospital level, and it can support, all of their ORs at once. So I think that's the other really unique thing about this. It's very scalable. It's an enterprise level system. Right now, if you have a robot or a guidance system, because robots are really just guidance systems, they're something where you're guiding the surgeon to make a precise cut. And we could talk about the benefits and disadvantages of robots, but guidance in general is expensive, and it's typically relegated to a single OR at a time. Mm-hmm. So if you want multiple systems, you have to buy multiple systems. Whereas in this case, the guidance, the software, that technology resides on a server somewhere, on a computer. And we can replicate that with just the cost of a headset that sits on the doctor's head. So the entire OR footprint sits on the doctor's head, which lowers the cost for the hospital, the costs of moving this equipment around, storing it, et cetera.
Dr. Gibby, I have to say, this has been really amazing. I've been covering imaging for, I guess, about 4 years, and I've seen a lot, but I've actually never seen anything like this. And I can totally see how it would help, both for the patient and for the entire care team, including both the radiologists and the surgeon. So thank you very much. For the folks who are watching, if the type of stuff that you just saw, the VisAR, is part of what you're responsible for, or what your colleagues are responsible for, reach out to the Novarad team, go and learn about this. It seems like it's really special. And for Dr. Gibby, thank you so much for coming in and kudos for all the work you're doing. This is really special.
Jake, it's really been an honor to be with you. Thank you so much. You have a very perceptive insight into this, and we think it's going to help transform medicine.